My name is Claire Holloway. I'm 30 years old, and the night my family forced me out, I learned that in some homes, the loudest lie is the first thing people believe. My sister stood in the yard crying so hard it looked as if her entire life had just collapsed. She pointed at me and said I had destroyed her marriage. My mother did not ask a single question. My father did not ask for proof. He looked at me with clear disgust and shouted, "Get out! You're not worthy of this family." Then he began throwing my belongings onto the lawn. My shoes landed on the wet grass. My books fell into the dirt. A picture frame struck the walkway and cracked. My sister continued sobbing, saying I had introduced her husband to the woman who ruined their home, that I had opened the door to his betrayal, and that none of it would have happened if I had stayed out of her life. I knew she was lying. I understood it immediately. But when your own mother refuses to look at you and your father pushes your suitcase off the porch with his foot, the truth begins to feel smaller than the shame around it. So I did not scream and I did not beg. I gathered what I could, walked to the curb, and left. 1 week later, I was sitting alone in a rented carriage house with a book open on my lap, trying to remind my body what quiet felt like again when an email arrived. The sender made me sit up straight. The subject line made my stomach drop. I opened it and read it once, then again, and by the time I reached the attachment, I understood exactly why my sister had been so desperate to accuse me first. Within 20 minutes, my phone was exploding. My sister wrote, "Please don't send that email." My mother wrote, "We were wrong. Please give us one chance." My father wrote, "We need to talk. Come home." I stared at the screen, thought about the broken picture frame lying in the yard, and answered with 2 words, "No, never." But before explaining what was inside that email and why it turned my family from confident to frightened in less than an hour, consider this. If your own parents threw you out over a lie, would you forgive them? The truth is that the night I was expelled from the house was not the beginning. It was simply the moment my sister's lie finally found an audience. I moved into a tiny carriage house on the east side of Savannah. 2 days later, I realized just how small it was. The walls were thin, the stairs narrow, the kitchen drawer crooked and never fully closing, and there was one small window above the sink facing a brick wall. It was not beautiful, but it belonged to me. There was something oddly comforting about being in a place where nobody could suddenly decide I did not belong. I worked as a collections manager at a maritime museum, which sounds more impressive than it is. Most days, my job meant preserving old maps, cataloging instruments from long-lost ships, and handling objects that had survived storms, wars, saltwater, and time. I used to believe that work made me calm under pressure. After what happened with my family, I realized it mostly made me skilled at dealing with damaged things. My older sister, Vanessa Holloway, lived in a completely different world. She chaired charity events, appeared in local magazines, hosted brunches for people who enjoyed being photographed helping others, and moved through Savannah as if every room existed to highlight her presence. Her husband, Adam Keller, was an architect, quiet, polite, and careful with his words. He was the kind of man people trusted quickly because he never seemed to seek attention. To outsiders, they appeared perfect. To anyone who knew Vanessa well enough, the relationship looked carefully managed. 3 days after I moved out, my best friend Nina Brooks arrived with takeout, 2 paper plates, and enough anger on my behalf to warm the entire house. Nina designed museum exhibits, wore paint stains on her jeans as if they were part of her style, and had once been banned from a donor luncheon for telling a board member his vision was simply expensive nonsense with poor lighting. She sat cross-legged on my floor while I explained everything. The accusation, the shouting, the boxes thrown into the yard, and the way my mother never once asked if the story was true. When I finished, Nina said, "That story is too neat. Vanessa didn't panic and invent it in the moment. She prepared it before she needed it." I wanted to argue, mostly because I was tired enough to question my own memory. Or maybe I missed something, I said. Maybe I really did put Adam around the wrong person at the wrong time. Nina set down her fork and looked directly at me. "Claire, that's exactly what people like Vanessa depend on. They make you doubt your own memory while guiding everyone else toward the version that protects them." Then she said the sentence that shifted everything. Stop thinking emotionally and start thinking historically. What happened before the lie? The next day, while I was relabeling brass navigation tools in museum storage, Nina texted me, "Chloe Mercer will talk. Don't waste it." Chloe had co-chaired charity galas with Vanessa and had one of those social memories that stored everything. Who arrived late, who left early, who smiled too quickly, who drank too much, and who said one thing in public but another in the hallway. We met her that evening at a wine bar near Forsyth Park. She wore bright red lipstick and the expression of someone who regretted agreeing to this meeting before we had even sat down. At first, she gave us polished, cautious answers. Vanessa had been under pressure. The divorce was emotional. Families were complicated. Then Nina leaned forward and said calmly, "That explanation sounds elegant, Chloe, but it doesn't answer the real question. Why was Vanessa so ready to blame Claire?" Chloe grew quiet. She stirred the ice in her glass once and lowered her voice. "Because she was already afraid of something else," she said. My pulse jumped. "What something else?" She hesitated, then finally continued. "There were rumors about Vanessa and a man from the restoration board. Nothing public, just whispers. But enough that she started watching Adam closely, almost as if she needed him to be guilty before anyone looked too closely at her." That was the first real crack in the story. Then Chloe gave us a name, Grant Ellis. He handled logistics for the spring preservation weekend. "If anyone knows who is where," she said, "he does." After Chloe left, I sat there staring at my glass while Nina was already reaching for her bag, as if the night had only just begun. But when I got home, the adrenaline faded and left something heavier behind. Exhaustion. Real exhaustion. The kind that makes disappearing seem easier than fighting. I looked at the unread messages from my mother asking me to be reasonable, and for a few minutes I honestly considered letting the entire situation go. Let them keep the lie. Let them keep each other. Let them believe I was the problem if it bought me peace. Then my phone buzzed. Nina had sent a picture of the crooked kitchen drawer with one line beneath it. "Even this drawer knows it's broken. That doesn't mean you pretend it works." I laughed despite myself. That ridiculous message kept me from giving up. The next morning, I went to meet Grant. Grant Ellis met us at an oyster place by the river, and from the moment he sat down, it was clear he disliked disorder. He looked like someone who ironed his shirts while listening to classical music and used calendar reminders for things most people trusted themselves to remember. His voice was calm, his watch perfectly polished, and his first words were simple. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because your sister crossed a line." That told me more than gossip ever could. Men like Grant do not step into conflict unless silence has begun to feel like complicity. He explained that rumors about Vanessa had begun months before the divorce filing. She had been spending unusual amounts of time with Daniel Cross, a married preservation consultant who moved through Savannah's nonprofit circles as if he belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. At first, it was easy to explain away: committee meetings, donor planning, event schedules. Then came late-night strategy calls, unusual room requests during board weekends, and two separate moments when Vanessa began asking odd questions about Adam: which women he had spoken to at museum events, whether he seemed distracted recently, whether anyone had mentioned him talking to someone new. "That's what bothered me," Grant said. She wasn't asking like a worried wife. She was asking like someone preparing a defense before the accusation arrived. My chest felt cold. "You're sure?" He looked at me evenly. "Claire, I manage people for a living. I know the difference between panic and planning." Then he slid a folded printout across the table. It was a logistics sheet from a preservation weekend in Charleston. Most of it was routine: arrival times, room notes, vendor contacts. But written in the margin were two discrete adjustments: Vanessa Holloway, Daniel Cross. Same floor, same wing. Quiet reassignment. No spouses copied. Nina let out a quiet breath. I stared at the page and felt my stomach tighten. It was something, but not enough. Not for parents like mine, and not against someone like Vanessa. "She can explain this away," I said. "Work-related coincidence. Bad optics." Grant nodded. "Probably, which is why you need something from inside the marriage." He mentioned Adam's name before I even asked. He suspected something had been wrong long before Vanessa filed for divorce. But Vanessa spoke first, and once she did, everyone else stopped asking questions. I contacted Adam that evening. I expected silence, maybe anger, perhaps a polite refusal. Instead, he replied in less than 10 minutes, "I'll meet tomorrow." We met the next morning on a shaded bench in one of Savannah's old squares. Adam looked like a man who had been losing sleep for months and had only recently admitted it to himself. He did not waste time. "Vanessa told both our families that you introduced me to some woman through the museum," he said. "She said emotional boundaries were crossed." I looked directly at him. "Were they?" His expression hardened immediately. "No. I spoke to that donor twice, both times in public, and each conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. Vanessa needed a version of events that made her look hurt instead of guilty." I handed him Grant's printout. He read it slowly, his jaw tightening. "I knew it," he said quietly. Then he told me something that changed the entire direction of the story. Months earlier, one of Vanessa's hotel confirmations had accidentally synced to an old shared tablet. She deleted it before he could save it, but he still remembered the hotel name because it was not one they normally used as a couple, and there had been no reason for the booking. The moment he said it, my whole body went still. The Ashcraftoft House Hotel, a boutique property outside Savannah. I recognized the name because the museum had hosted a donor dinner there the previous year, and I had coordinated the reservation contact lists for that event. That meant if Vanessa had reused an old booking profile tied to the dinner and forgot to remove my museum email from the back-end notification system, any correction, billing summary, or automated room notice could have been sent to me by mistake. It was a long shot, and before we followed it further, the day threw us a distraction. Chloe texted Nina that same afternoon, excited about new gossip. Apparently, someone at church was claiming Daniel was not even the only man Vanessa had gotten close to. For 2 hours, Nina and I followed that lead seriously. It went nowhere. It was a dead end, bad gossip, possibly even deliberate noise. I sat at my kitchen table that night with a headache and a stack of papers and said, "What if this entire thing is just rumors and coincidence?" Nina leaned against my counter with her arms folded. "Then we confirm it and stop." But we do not stop just because Vanessa performs better than you do. She was right. Instead of confronting my sister with weak evidence and giving her another opportunity to cry her way out of responsibility, I opened my laptop and started searching for something she could not perform over. Something that did not depend on emotion. Something written down. The next day felt slow and exhausting. I spent the morning at the museum pretending to function normally while my thoughts kept returning to the same possibility. During lunch, I pulled archived files from the museum's donor dinner at Ashcraftoft House and searched every old logistics sheet, room list, and notification profile I could locate. Eventually, I found it. An internal event profile from the previous year with my museum email attached as a secondary contact for reservation adjustments and billing corrections. It was not private guest information, just administrative overflow that nobody notices until something goes wrong. If Vanessa had reused part of that event profile when booking a private stay and forgot to remove my address, the hotel system could easily send me something by mistake. That was enough. It gave me a path forward. I drafted a careful message to guest relations. I did not accuse anyone, and I did not mention an affair, my family, or Vanessa's divorce. I simply explained that I believed my museum email might still be attached in error to a reused booking profile from a previous nonprofit event, and asked whether any recent administrative notices had been misrouted. Then I sent it, and tried not to check my inbox every 3 minutes. By the following afternoon, I started thinking the lead had failed. By 3 o'clock, I hated myself for hoping. By 4, I was standing in the museum's preparation room holding a restored brass compass and thinking maybe proof would not matter anyway. Maybe my family had already chosen the version of events they preferred because it was easier than accepting shame. Then my phone buzzed. One new email. Sender, Ashcraftoft House Guest Relations. Subject, correction of secondary notification contact, attached billing summary. I set the compass down and opened the email. The first line was polite. The second changed everything. The hotel apologized for the inconvenience and confirmed that my email address had mistakenly remained attached as a secondary notification contact on a reused executive reservation profile. Attached for my records were the corrected booking notices and billing summaries that had been generated before the mistake was discovered. My hands did not shake, at least not at first. I opened the PDF and read every page carefully. Vanessa Holloway, Daniel Cross, 2 adjoining suites, 2 separate weekends, privacy preference requested, late night wine service, valet logs, room service after midnight, 1 note mentioning discreet access arrangements. I returned to the body of the email and read it again because I needed to be completely certain about what I was seeing. And there it was, plain and unmistakable. This was not gossip, suspicion, or some anonymous warning. It was a simple administrative correction from the hotel itself, explaining that my museum email had remained tied to a reused reservation profile and that the attached records had been generated before the error was corrected. That was the email. That was the thing my family became afraid of. A straightforward, professional, impossible-to-argue confirmation that my sister had been exactly where she should not have been, with the exact man she should not have been with, during the same period she was accusing me of destroying her marriage. I texted Nina 3 words, "I have it." She called immediately. Read it to me. I did. By the time I finished, she was already driving over. We sat in the museum parking lot with the attachment open between us, and she said, "This is why people like Vanessa fear paperwork. Drama can be debated. Records cannot." I still had a choice to make. Send it immediately or confront Vanessa first. I chose confrontation, partly because I wanted to see her reaction when the performance failed, and partly because people under pressure sometimes reveal more than they intend. She opened the door to her townhouse wearing a cream sweater and carefully applied makeup, as if the woman who had cried in our parents' yard had been played by someone else. "What do you want?" she said sharply. I stepped inside before she could block the doorway. "I want to know why you blamed me for your divorce, before anyone even asked what you were hiding." She gave a short laugh. "You're unbelievable." I raised my phone. "Ashcraft House disagrees." The reaction was small but clear. A brief pause, a flicker in her expression where the performance slipped. "What are you talking about?" she asked. I handed her the first page of the billing summary. Her fingers tightened around the paper. Her eyes dropped to read it. When she looked back up, the confidence was gone, and something closer to fear had replaced it. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. "From the email your carelessness sent to the wrong person," I replied. She tried denial first, then outrage, then offense. "So now you're spying on me?" "No," I said calmly. "You reused an old profile and accidentally exposed yourself." She turned away and then said something that made the room go silent. Adam was already leaving. I stepped closer. "Then why blame me?" She spun back and answered sharply, "Because you were convenient." 4 words. That was all. No apology, no regret, no panic, just entitlement. My life had been easier to sacrifice than her reputation. That sentence removed the last sympathy I had left. I walked out without another word. Halfway down the block, my phone started lighting up. First my mother called, then my father, then Vanessa. I ignored them. They already knew. The only question now was what I would do with the evidence. That night, Nina and I spread everything across my kitchen table like we were preparing a legal case instead of processing a family betrayal. Grant's rooming notes, Adam's timeline, the screenshot of Vanessa's threat, the hotel email itself, and the attached billing summaries. The wording mattered. The order mattered. Most important of all, the source mattered. If I simply forwarded the hotel bills, Vanessa could claim I had stolen or manipulated them. But the guest relations email explained exactly why the records had been sent to me and made the situation far harder to distort. We constructed the email carefully. No insults, no shouting, no drama, just chronology and documentation. I addressed it to my mother, my father, Adam, and Vanessa. The subject line read, "Correction of false accusation and attached documentation." In the body of the message, I explained that I had been falsely accused of causing Vanessa's marriage to fail by introducing Adam to another woman. I stated that earlier that morning, I had received an administrative correction from Ashcraft House Hotel confirming my museum email had mistakenly remained attached to a reused reservation profile. I explained that the attached records documented Vanessa Holloway and Daniel Cross booking adjoining suites during the same period Vanessa had redirected suspicion toward me. Then I attached the hotel email itself, followed by the booking summaries. At the end, I added one final line. I will not continue carrying blame that was created to protect someone else's betrayal. I sent the message at 8:12 that morning. 7 minutes later, Vanessa called. Then she called again. Then my mother called, followed by my father. I ignored them all. At 8:29, the text messages started arriving. Vanessa wrote first, "Please don't send that email anywhere else." My mother wrote, "We were wrong. Please give us one chance." My father wrote, "We need to talk. Come home." Then another message from him appeared. "This has to stay private." Private? That word almost made me laugh. There had been nothing private about my belongings being thrown into the yard like garbage. I stared at the screen, remembered my father's voice telling me I was not worthy of the family, and replied with 2 words, "No, never." Adam called from a number I had not silenced. When I answered, he was quiet for a moment before saying, "Thank you." Not because he was happy, and not because the truth made divorce easier, but because someone had finally written down what Vanessa had spent weeks trying to hide behind performance. He told me his attorney would use the email and the attachments. He also said Daniel's wife had questioned unexplained hotel charges once before and had been given vague answers. Now she had a reason to stop accepting them. Around noon, my mother arrived at the museum. A volunteer came to tell me an upset woman was waiting in the lobby. The moment I saw her standing beneath the mural of storm-tossed ships, twisting the strap of her purse, I understood exactly why she had come. "Claire, please," she said the moment she saw me. "Don't do this to us." The word "us" landed like an insult. "You already did something to me," I replied. "You threw me out without asking a single question." She started crying immediately. "Vanessa told us." "I know what Vanessa told you," I interrupted. "What I want to know is why my own mother didn't care whether it was true." She moved through the usual explanations: emotion, confusion, family pressure, panic. Then the real sentence finally appeared. If this spreads, Vanessa could lose everything. There it was. Not grief for me, but fear for her. She should have thought of that before she used my life as padding, I said. My mother reached for my arm, and I stepped back. "Come home," she whispered. "We can fix this." I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "A house is not a home when it throws out the wrong daughter to protect the guilty one." That evening, my father texted asking me to come to the house for one conversation. I went because part of me needed to hear what the truth sounded like in that room once the lies stopped working. Vanessa was already there, pale and tense. My mother had tissues arranged on the coffee table. My father stood behind his chair as if posture might somehow create dignity. He began by saying, "You've made your point." I answered, "No, the documents made the point. I only forwarded them." Vanessa started talking about pressure, loneliness, emotional strain, how marriages are complicated and mistakes happen. Then she softened her voice and said, "I never meant for Claire to get hurt this badly." I looked directly at her. "You used my name before anyone even asked questions. You meant for me to get hurt enough to protect you." For the first time that evening, nobody interrupted. Finally, my father asked, "What do you want?" It was the first real question anyone had asked me since the night in the yard. "I want the truth," I answered clearly. "I did not cause your divorce. I did not betray this family. I was thrown out because Vanessa lied." The silence stretched across the room. Then my father said, without looking at me, "You didn't cause the divorce." My mother added, "We acted too quickly." Too quickly, not cruelly, not shamefully, just too quickly. Then I looked at Vanessa and asked, "Do you admit it?" She closed her eyes and whispered, "Yes." It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. It felt late, thin, and cautious. And then my father weakened even that moment by saying, "Now we need to handle this as a family." That was when I understood exactly what they wanted, not justice or healing, but containment. So I stood up and said, "You are not asking for forgiveness. You are asking for control." No one argued with that. I walked out for the second time, and this time no one pretended they didn't know why. Once the truth was written down, it stopped belonging only to my family. Adam's attorney requested copies of the hotel email and attachments, and I sent them. Daniel Cross resigned from 2 preservation committees within the same week. One donor family quietly withdrew support from an event Vanessa was supposed to help lead. A charity co-chair found a scheduling reason to distance herself. None of that happened because I spread the story around town. It happened because once proof exists, people start asking their own questions. And my sister had built her entire life on the assumption that nobody ever would. 3 days later, Vanessa arrived at my carriage house alone. No makeup, no polished smile, no audience. She stood behind the screen door with her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold. "Can I come in?" she asked. I kept the screen between us. "Say what you came to say." She looked smaller than usual, but not softer, an important difference. "Daniel is denying everything beyond friendship," she said. "Adam is using the records. Mom can't sleep. Dad won't even look at me. You got what you wanted." That sentence told me she still didn't understand anything. "No," I said calmly. "What I wanted was not to be thrown out of my home because of your lie." Her jaw tightened. "I was desperate." "You were deliberate." She flinched at that. For a moment, I almost saw honesty. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said quietly. "It went exactly as far as you allowed it to go, as long as it landed on me instead of you." Then she asked if I would talk to Adam and ask him to be reasonable. I actually laughed. "You blamed me for your divorce, got me thrown out, and now you want me to help manage the fallout?" "I'm your sister," she snapped. "You were," I replied quietly, "right up until the moment you decided my life was acceptable collateral." She stared at me as if I had betrayed her, which would have been almost amusing if it were not so absurd. "So that's it," she demanded. "You're cutting me off forever?" I thought about the years of excuses, the moment she called me convenient, and the complete absence of a real apology. "No," I said, "you cut me off first. I'm simply refusing to crawl back." She left angry. Strangely, that made me feel lighter. Anger meant she had heard me, even if she would never admit it. My mother called that night asking me to be compassionate. My father texted 2 days later suggesting family counseling now that everything was in the open. I ignored both, not out of revenge, but because I had finally learned the difference between healing and being pulled back into a performance. Around the same time, my museum director asked me to come into her office. I walked in expecting that Daniel Cross's name might have reached my workplace. Instead, she said, "I've heard there may be personal fallout touching some nonprofit circles. If anyone tries to drag the museum or your position into gossip, we will shut it down." I nearly cried from the unfamiliar experience of being protected without having to ask for it. Weeks passed. The carriage house began to feel less like exile and more like a beginning. Nina helped me paint one wall sea blue because, in her words, "You need at least one surface in this place that looks like a future." She also kept bringing small practical gifts: a toolbox, proper dish towels, labels for pantry jars, and a lamp that actually lit the room. Each of those things meant more than the dramatic emotional messages my family began sending once they realized I was not automatically returning. Eventually, my mother left a voicemail saying, "I know we failed you." It was the closest she came to a real apology. My father never reached that point. His remorse remained procedural, as if correcting one statement could balance public humiliation. It couldn't. In the quiet after everything, I realized something about revenge stories that people rarely say aloud. Revenge is not always about destroying someone. Sometimes it is about refusing to keep carrying what they placed on you. Sometimes it is simply letting the truth do the heavy lifting while you step away from the lie. About a month after the email, Adam asked to meet one last time at a coffee shop near the river. By then, the divorce had moved from shock into logistics. He looked less broken than before, though still tired in the way betrayal leaves behind. He slid a document across the table and said, "You may want this." It was a signed statement confirming in plain language that I had never interfered in his marriage, never encouraged an inappropriate relationship, and had been falsely blamed after Vanessa's involvement with Daniel Cross began to surface. I looked at it for a long moment. After weeks of defending my reality, there it was in writing from the one person whose voice made the lie impossible to revive. "You didn't have to do this," I said. He gave a tired half smile. Maybe not, but I'm done watching Vanessa rewrite everything. Then he added the sentence that stayed with me longer than the document itself. You were the only honest person in a house full of performance. That was the real center of the entire story. Performance. Vanessa performed victimhood. My mother performed peace. My father performed authority. And for years, I performed forgiveness, hoping it would eventually earn me fairness. It didn't. Once I stopped performing, everything shifted. Later, my parents brought the last few things still left at their house. My mother cried in the driveway. My father carried the heaviest box as if silent labor could stand in for remorse. When he said, "There's always a place for you with us," I answered, "There wasn't when it mattered." He had no reply. Perhaps that was the first honest silence he ever gave me. Vanessa moved out of the townhouse not long after. Daniel Cross disappeared from the nonprofit circuit. My sister did not lose absolutely everything. People like Vanessa rarely do. But she lost something she had always depended on, the ability to shape the narrative before the facts arrived. As for me, I stayed in Savannah. I kept my job. I started sleeping through the night again. I learned which stair in the carriage house creaked and stopped hearing it as loneliness. Nina kept insisting I looked taller lately. Maybe I did. Shame bends the spine more than grief does. On the anniversary of the night I was thrown out, my mother sent one message: "I still pray you come back to us." I stared at it for a long time before replying. I came back to myself. That has to be enough. And it was. Because the real ending to this story is not just that one email changed everything, it is how it changed everything. The email came from Ashcraft House Hotel, sent by guest relations to correct a contact error Vanessa never noticed. It explained that my old museum email had remained attached to a reused reservation profile and included billing summaries showing Vanessa and Daniel booking adjoining suites during the same week. She accused me of destroying her marriage. That one email exposed the affair, exposed the lie, exposed how quickly my family chose convenience over truth, and exposed how frightened they became the moment paperwork replaced drama. That is why the messages arrived so quickly. Not because they suddenly loved me better, but because they suddenly understood I had proof. People talk about revenge as if it must look like fire to count. Mine didn't. Mine looked like a clean subject line, a hotel attachment, and the end of my cooperation. Mine looked like refusing to come home simply because the people who broke me had finally become afraid. Mine looked like two words: no, never. My mother threw me out because my sister blamed me for her divorce. Then one email changed everything. Not because it created the truth, but because it forced everyone hiding from it to finally see it in writing. And there is one question that still stays with me. When people only apologize after proof corners them, is that love or just fear wearing a softer face? From my perspective, this story feels like a powerful lesson about truth, self-respect, and the value of critical thinking. People sometimes rush to judgment without seeking real understanding, and that can damage relationships deeply. That is why education, emotional awareness, and the ability to question what we hear are such important skills in life. Clear thinking helps us stay calm, evaluate situations fairly, and protect our integrity when circumstances become unjust. In the end, truth often speaks louder than accusations. So I will leave you with one question. If you were in this situation, would you fight to prove the truth, or would you walk away and start fresh?